Well, thank you, David. Praise from the praiseworthy is praise indeed. That you are here tonight is testimony to the work that United for Action and the team that David ticked off at the beginning of this meeting met. I have an infinite admiration for people who do the dirty work of political organizing, because that's where we fight all of these things out. And basically what we're here tonight is to talk about a script for fighting some things out. And if we didn't have United for Action and all the people who support it, we didn't have the Damascus Citizens for Sustainability who sucked me into this, if we didn't have New York H2O, we'd have to invent them all. And we owe them an incredible debt of gratitude. And so, David, I'd like to say thank you. Now, what does this all mean? Well, first of all, it means that Benjamin Franklin, one of my great heroes, was right. Benjamin Franklin once said, "I know man to be a rational animal, for he can find a rationale for anything he wishes to do." And one of the things that's important for us, because we're not here tonight because we love gas fracking, is to understand why people want to do gas fracking. Now, the world has had for 200 years a love affair with fossil fuel. Fossil fuel has made this world we live in today. Before James Watt invented the reciprocating steam engine, which created this voracious need for energy which wood could not supply, and made us grateful for nature for providing all of this buried carbon. It took 6 months to get to China, 6 weeks to get to Great Britain. 40% of all babies died. And we all live, 85% of the world lived in subsistence agriculture. Fossil fuel made the world we live in today. It's idle not to pretend that. It's idle not to pretend that that has left a huge legacy. It is that legacy that you are swimming uphill against when we talk about these issues. It's that legacy that makes people like Jeanette have to rattle off all of the stuff she rattled off, because people are willing to believe conclusions that are not fact-based, because we grew up in this culture where, you know, discovering oil was good. How many of us have not seen movies like Boomtown on AMC? We all grew up with this culture. We all love to drive. At least I certainly love to drive. And fossil fuel made all of that possible. It's hard for us to believe that that wonderful world is over. And that's essentially what we're talking about here, that the world we have grown up and lived in, the world that has shaped many of our myths, is in fact over. And that what you are doing here tonight is you're participating in the birth of a new world. And the births are always hard. I was at the 3 of them, and I can assure you, they're no picnic. And I didn't do the real work. So again, what does it all mean? The first thing it all means is that we have to be opposed to any shale gas fracking in New York. Now, this is not a position. I always held. I've cherished the reputation I got for brokering agreements in the watershed, for brokering water conservation, for even standing off people like Donald Trump. We as a country and a culture believe that we should be able to balance these things. That we have organizations like EDF that are still pursuing the chimera that if we write the right regulations, somehow we can have gas fracking that works. We can somehow eliminate this enormous amount of environmental problems. But we have to face reality. The reality is that though it is difficult and hard for many people, particularly organizations that value their, quote, respectability, to say that we should ban shale gas fracking in New York, we should ban shale gas fracking in New York. Because that, first of all, there is no way we can stop the environmental consequences from happening. Now, I could, with the right set of people, sit down and on table, write a set of regulations that would supposedly protect the environment. But I know as a person who had to create such regulations and make them stick in the New York City watershed, that there is no way in hell those regulations would ever be carried out. No government, to my knowledge, is going to be willing to tell gas fracking industry, you have a $15 million well here, you must stop it because you're violating something environmental. No government I know is talking about building the size of enforcement staff, the hundreds and hundreds of people, the inspectors, the on-site managers of concrete quality, the people who would deal with the watershed issues that would be enabled to enforce this. Quite frankly, it would have to, if you were not willing to kind of, beat people over the head with a hammer in a regulatory context, this industry would not play ball with you. Anyone who thinks that this is an industry that intends to adopt a responsible attitude towards being a good nature is cordially invited to go over to Pennsylvania and look at what the industry did when the gas fracking legislation went through the state legislature this year. They essentially steamrolled over local home rule. They essentially steamrolled over environmental standards. They basically said the public be damned. A regulatory system cannot work if it is against an industry that refuses to accept the obligation to be a good neighbor. And there are two reasons this industry will not accept it. First of all, whether we like it or not, and with all due deference to our friends from Texas, this is an industry that grew up used to its privileged place in American society. This is an industry that grew up by Dick Cheney, exempted from federal regulation. This is an industry that believes that as long as it gets out the product, it is meeting the national interest. This is an industry in which, quite frankly, no one ever got promoted into senior management for being good with communities or good with the environment. They only got promoted because they got the product out. This is not an industry that goes out to deliberately pollute. But the truth of the matter is this industry has given no evidence that it cares about being a good neighbor, that it cares about anything but production. Now, industrial culture matters. Corporate culture matters hugely. This is not DuPont, this is not 3M, this is not Toyota, this is not In Swiss Re, this is not Ben & Jerry's. This is a different industry. Secondly, this is an industry that can't afford to do it right. That to do shale gas fracking right, to take care of the wastewater, to deal with the air emissions, to mitigate the transportation impacts, to design and manage pipelines and compressor stations that do not bleed methane into the environment, to make sure that the well casings are done properly, would be enormously expensive. This is an industry that is not making back its cash flow. The point of Deborah's presentation and the point of Jeanette's presentation is this is an industry that can't afford to do it right. That in an industry that is getting less than $2 per TCF when it projected it needed 5 or 6. That's what all of these analysts are saying. That's what all the argument on Wall Street is about. This industry cannot afford to be a good environmental housekeeper. It costs money. I'm on the board of a mining group, one of those extractive industries Jeanette was talking about. It costs us a lot of money to do green mining. Fortunately, we're willing to pay it because we believe it's in our interest and in the interest of the community we work in to do so. But there is no evidence that the shale gas industry shares that understanding, that it is all rhetoric. And so, quite frankly, the only way to protect the New York environment is to ban shale gas fracking. Now, I know there are organizations like EDF, that, environmental groups that continue to pursue the myth that somehow we can balance shale gas against the environment. I'm all for that effort. I don't think we should be sarcastic. I don't think we should disparage the idealism from which it comes. They're just wrong. The truth of the matter is, as I said, if you're not being realistic about the industry culture, if you're not really kind of looking at people and how they are running their business, you're going to come up a cropper. Regulatory systems have to be run in the real world. When we set out to protect the New York City watershed, we hired over 400 new people. Watershed inspectors, water quality testers, lawyers, public outreach people. This is for an area 1/8 the size of the Marcellus Shale, with a much less complicated environmental problem in which we had the cooperation of the farm community and the locals. That is, put those numbers together in your head, wrap your hands around them, think of what would be involved. Ask yourself, how would we ensure that the kind of drilling, these 2-mile deep casings, is done with quality standards? Do we think the industry would accept it if a quality inspector came up and said, sorry, you blew that one, spend $6 million more drilling a new well? Does anyone think that's going to happen? Does anyone think that's going to happen without a fight? That's what a regulator would have to be willing to do. And that's why, much as I commend the idealism of efforts to come up with a balance, it's a paper exercise. As I said, I could write a series of regulations that would look great on paper, but they would have as much reality as some of the presentations you heard Jeanette talk about. They just wouldn't happen in the real world. We have to, if we want to preserve our water, our environment, we have to live in the real world. Okay, there's a second reason to ban shale gas fracking. It is an undevelopment plan for New York. That is, I'm going to summarize a lot of what Jeanette said. I'm going to disagree with a couple points. But the truth of the matter is, shale gas fracking is an undevelopment plan for New York. How do I know this? First of all, ask yourself a simple common sense question. How can an industry that is not making money be of economic benefit to the state of New York? Did I miss something? Did I fail to do due diligence here? Secondly, let's just focus on a few key numbers. You heard Jeanette talk about the number for road damage, at least $200 million a year. One of the things I learned in issuing bonds for the city of New York was to go out and read the 10Ks. 10Ks are statements companies have to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission under penalty of fraud. The 10Ks, outside the fact that they acknowledge, someday I'd like to write an op-ed that was just 10Ks from gas companies. Outside the fact they acknowledge everything we say about the industry environmentally, they tell us that this industry has $450 million insurance, liability insurance for the entire state of New York. Does anyone think, given the kinds of things that can go wrong with this gas fracking activity, that $450 million of insurance is worth it? No. What does this mean? It means that the people of the state of New York will pay the cost of anything that goes wrong. Let's talk about other things you'll pay the cost for. You heard about all of the adjacent land uses, the loss of property values. Nothing is more heartbreaking to go upstate and speak at a meeting and talk to some retired person who sunk their entire life savings into what they thought would be a quiet rural retreat, and have now discovered that they have lost the value of that investment due to the presence of gas fracking. Gas fracking blights the land. It essentially destroys the economic value of other landscapes. There's a reason everyone in Cooperstown, the entire community, is opposed to gas fracking. Can you imagine the approaches to this landscape gem, this site of tourism, being lined with gas fracking wells? Let's say it'd be hasta la vista, Cooperstown. The fact that the regulations that the state of New York is proposing and their economic analysis considers it is okay to do this to a place like Cooperstown speaks volumes about what would happen to the rest of the state economically if gas fracking takes place. Gas fracking relies on the public picking up all the costs the natural gas industry cannot afford to pay. It cannot afford to pay it because of this gas surplus, which I will talk about a little bit. In other words, you would be subsidizing the gas industry in the state of New York. Your tax dollars, the tax dollars of the communities upstate, it is an undevelopment plan for New York. It is the plan that will suck wealth out of the New York State landscape, transfer it to the pockets of the shareholders of gas fracking companies. Now, I'm often told that, well, what about jobs? Well, what about jobs? Outside the fact that I think Jeanette has pretty well abolished the jobs argument, the real question with jobs is what kind of jobs? These will be great jobs if you like running hotels that rent rooms by the hour. They will be great jobs if you want a career in penology. For the first 2 buildings they built in Sheridan, Wyoming were new jails. There's a terrific quote from the mayor of the town that is at the center of the Babkin oil field in North Dakota, which is the same economy. He says, "We rule the city by day, but they rule the city by night." It's a transient male population. We don't have to spell out what that means. These are people who are far away from home, who are mostly dreaming of putting together enough money to go back home and buy a house and get married and find a real job. This is not the economy of the future. This shale gas fracking is an undevelopment plan for the state of New York. It depends on enormous amounts of money subsidizing things like the disposition of used gas fracking, subsidizing health risk. We've not even talked about the radon issue yet. So, item 2, we can't protect the environment, and it's an undevelopment plan for the state of New York. There's a third reason we should be against shale gas fracking, which is the past. As I said at the beginning, we as a society have to kind of uncouple the 250-year love affair modern civilization has had with fossil fuel. Gas fracking will not do that. Gas fracking looks backward in time. It's clear from economic analyses elsewhere that the kind of low price of shale gas has had disastrous implications for green energy. For people who are particularly in the utility side, where the utilities are taking the course of least resistance and going after this cheap natural gas. Now, it presents some interesting political issues, what to deal with this surplus of natural gas that I want to direct it for a minute. But if you believe the future of the planet is tied to green fuel, and it's clear that that's true. And it's clear, quite frankly, that global warming has not gone away, however the deniers are. Then shale gas fracking is not the way to go. 2 years ago, I was in Calgary for a meeting of, there's a group up there that has a conference every year on kind of critical issues for Canada. The critical issue is the future of gas fracking, and I was kind of the token environmentalist. Because I'd done some work on Alberta water issues. And the one question I asked that did seem to have some impact on all these executives was as follows. Gas fracking represents a potential investment of billions of dollars. If I have billions of dollars to spend, is this really the new energy industry of the future I want to spend it on? This is a question we should all be asking. Where we should be directing our creativity, where we should be directing our energy, is figuring out how to take this billions of dollars that are going to come out of our pockets and use them to fund green energy, the solar power, the energy conservation, the wind power, the geothermal power, the heat pumps of the future. We as a society have failed in terms of creativity, that we have not been able to take the money we are trying to make with natural gas and put it into green energy. If we are talking about jobs, the future always means more jobs than the past. That's very, if I were running an oil company, God forbid should be so mean to me, but if I were running an oil company, what I would be trying to do night and day would be to get myself out of fossil fuel, use the profits I'm making from fossil fuel, and get myself into green energy. We as a society have failed to make our fossil fuel industry the true transition bridge to the future. We should be thinking about ownership portions. We should be thinking about financial, investment schemes that do this. Now, a couple of other points. One is, I was interested in Jeanette's comment about Cogden. I can't say I found it very exciting. I actually found it rather puerile and depressing. But the idea that this cheap energy is good for the state of New York, let's kind of talk about that for a minute. Outside the fact that it's not the free market. I mean, according to the free market, you're interested not in a cheap price, but the right price. But let's face facts politically. We're up against a country that loves cheap energy. So how do we get around this problem? The truth of the matter is we don't need shale gas to get cheap energy. The truth of the matter is where is the expensive energy we're producing right now? We're producing a lot of oil right now that is very expensive. And the truth of the matter is most oil production comes with natural gas production. In fact, that used to be the way we got natural gas, from oil production. To keep, we have a world that's overflowing with natural gas. It is predicted by November there will not be a cubic meter of natural gas storage left in the United States. We don't need shale gas from New York. If you think cheap natural gas is a good idea, we don't need shale gas from New York to have it. We're going to have plenty of it elsewhere. We don't actually need it in Pennsylvania and Ohio either, but if they're dumb enough to do that, there's no reason we in New York should follow their example. The second thing is I want to talk about President Obama. I too am disappointed that the president has not had what I would consider a very coherent energy policy. But on the other hand, I kind of contemplate Romney, the state Senate, the Senate Republicans, the people who passed the Cheney bill with genuine terror, and so should you. And having lived in the political snake pit of being a commissioner from New York City, I think I can recommend to all of you a little patience with our elected president and the dilemma he faces in a country, that wants to blame him for high gasoline prices, even though why we're blaming him when the oil industry is making record profits and get huge government subsidies, all of which I would think would be going to lower costs. That is the theory, I believe. I think we have to have a little patience and a little faith. I, for one, was very encouraged by EPA's recent regulations in terms of air pollution. EPA remains our best hope for environmental science, and I personally believe that after this election is over and after the country has hopefully delivered the verdict it should deliver on the past-looking policies of the current Republican Party that's probably got Theodore Roosevelt weeping in his grave, I think we're going to see a resurgence in sensible thinking about energy. I think the global warming deniers have about run their course. I have to urge everyone to be patient here. We cannot afford to have a Republican administration dealing with these issues. I know this is not a partisan event, but again, I believe in facing facts. Drill baby drill is not an energy policy. It's a policy for national suicide. we have friends and allies upstate. The last reason we want to ban shale gas fracking is there will be civil war upstate if we don't. America is a democracy, and the people have spoken on this issue. If we kind of take a look at who is for, if you look, a good example is to look at Cooperstown again. Except for a handful of small landowners, the community is united against it. We can look at the 70 places in New York that have passed home rule. We can look at the desperation the industry has had in gutting home rule in Pennsylvania. We can look at the fights we're having in the Delaware River Basin, to keep the shale gas frackers out of there, in which the Damascus Citizen for Sustainability have just been such a tower of strength. The truth of the matter is that we would destroy the upstate landscape that we love, and people are not planning to give up that landscape without a fight. I know that people who do not believe that we can balance these issues are sometimes accused of being NIMBYs. Well, frankly, I wouldn't trust anyone who didn't love their own backyard. I think loving your backyard is the beginning of environmental understanding and wisdom. And loving fair play. There's nothing fair about what gas fracking does to adjacent landowners. The truth of the matter is, and we all came to this issue and we use these issues as surrogates, but the truth of the matter is it's not the environmental issues that at the end of the day are what are impelling people upstate. It is the fact that the environmental issues represent something else, the destruction of a landscape they love and they depend upon. And if the state of New York is foolish enough to essentially try and destroy that landscape by permitting gas fracking, then as I say, we're going to have civil war, we're going to have political and civil war in this state. We don't need it. We have other things in the state that are too important to do. There's nothing about an industry that can't make its money, that is going broke, that we need in this state that justifies paying these kinds of costs. And I hope now, what can you all do? Well, to begin with, you can support the organizations that are sponsoring this thing. And you can, in your own ways, in your own circle, you have to understand that we have to get away from these myths. There's a myth, for example, that we should have energy security. Energy security apparently means going back to the days of the 60s when America produced all of its own oil, and we all think that meant cheap oil. We don't need energy security. We've lived without it for 40 years. What we need is energy common sense. We need energy rationality, not energy security. Cheap energy. Nobody would buy a house filled with rats and cockroaches and leaking to the window because it was cheap. We need an energy policy that is not cheap but is right. We're a rich country. We can afford to do energy right. We can afford to be a beacon for the future. I teach a course in sustainability, and one of the things that always depresses me with the eager students I teach is the thought of the world they are confronting is so much different than the world I confronted when I was their age. They're looking at global warming. They're looking at the next inconvenient truth, which is the food crisis the world is going to be facing. We need as a society to band together to deal with these issues. We cannot afford something like gas fracking. We cannot afford something that depends upon trashing our environment, transferring wealth out of our landscape, creating hopeless controversy between winners and losers. We have too many other important things to do. Most importantly, we have a new energy world to create. This will not be easy. We're going to need a lot more studies like this. We're going to need a lot more analyses. But remember the real lesson of both Deborah and Jeanette. We are up against people who are not playing with a full deck. I mean, basically what they've told us is we're dealing with people who, as they say, believe what Ben Franklin says. We can always find a rationale for anything we want to do. And they are appealing to deeply rooted prejudices that we all have. That we're Americans, we can come up with a pragmatic balance. Shale gas fracking is not an issue that permits balance. Shale gas fracking is only an issue that permits a common sense answer for the state of New York. No. Thank you.